Hello, everyone, and happy World Wildlife Day. My name is Sharif. I'm the founder and CEO of FashWand LLC, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you here today to our World Wildlife Day panel. The theme for the United Nations World Wildlife Day for 2023 is Partnerships for Wildlife Conservation. And the theme for our panel today is how to save wildlife from extinction through strategic partnerships. Today, we will explore how partnerships expedite our efforts in saving wildlife. We hope to inspire you to come up with new ideas for innovative partnerships that can result in transformational changes to protect our wildlife from extinction. I'd like to start by sharing one of my favorite quotes. And now I have some slides to show you some images that really shares why are we here, who are we here for. Wildlife are not only incredibly beautiful, that designs inspired by them, their colors, their details, then just their natural beauty. They're also superheroes. Lots of innovations are inspired by wildlife. From the Leonardo da Vinci, the parachute, known to be inspired by seabirds and the albatross, to even spiders, robots, surgical tape, smart bird, gulls, the Western gulls, robots inspired by them, to robotic arm, taking inspiration from elephants, robo bees. It's just the list keeps going and going and going. Lots of technologies and innovations that we depend on are inspired by wildlife. In fact, part of my research for during my MS thesis was the ant colony optimization and how effective and efficient they are. Now I have some slides that shares examples of some of the wildlife that we're here for to help. Tandy and all the rhinos that are under threat from poaching. Beautiful Tandy is a survivor of a brutal poaching attack that took place the 2nd of March in 2012. All the beautiful lions and wildlife that are under threat through different forms of hunting and poaching, trapping. Beautiful wildlife such as the Asiatic cheetah, who are critically endangered. All the wildlife that are in great threat from the wildlife trade, the cockatoos and the animals that are being basically placed in water bottles, transported, sold through using the technology that we have to be sold online. All the wildlife that have been used for fashion throughout the time and still are. All the beautiful wildlife that live in the ocean, that their homes are filled with microplastics, petrochemicals, even from the clothing that a lot of us wear, from polyester, the impacts. All the beautiful wildlife that are in the exotic pet trade, they're being sold as pets. Pest control, rodenticide, rat poison, the impacts on all the different wildlife. Palm oil, the effects of palm oil, all the beautiful wildlife that are being killed because of palm oil, which gives us chocolate, lotion. These are just some of the examples. Wolves, lynx, hunting, fishing gear, lobster net, sonar, ship strikes, whales, sea lions, elephant seals, all the beautiful wildlife in the ocean that we have. Dolphins, sharks, and shark fin soup. And this is their homes. These are images from the birds, local birds in Southern California. So just where they live and the chemicals, the oil pollution, plastic pollution that they live around. Fishing hooks and fishing gear, and more plastic pollution. And that is why we're here. So we're here to bring our minds together, collaborate, use strategic partnerships, the power of bringing together our expertise and our skills from different organizations, different individuals to help protect these wildlife. So what we need is strategic partnerships to bring together organizations, countries, people, groups, to come up with new transformative ideas to drive change in order to save our wildlife from extinction. And now I'd like to share a special video, a special World Wildlife Day message from Dr. William Fowlds, a wildlife veterinarian and conservationist from South Africa.
Hi there, my name is Dr. William Fowlds. I work as a wildlife vet and conservationist in South Africa. But today I'm standing in London, UK, joining you in celebration of World Wildlife Day 2023. We find ourselves amidst massive global issues. We are confronted in this year by the biodiversity crisis, climate change, global inequality, and these are all existential threats to our future, and even more so to the future of our children and their children. So as you gather today under Global Conservation Force, Mike Veale and his team to set your minds to these issues, I really want to challenge you to find new, inventive and innovative ways to build partnerships. It's been inspirational just having GCF as part of our blend of partners on the ground in South Africa, tackling issues like the illegal wildlife trade and the rhino poaching crisis. But I think our challenge now is to broaden that foundation into restoration of biodiversity, connected conservation, building corridors, and really finding solutions to these very complicated issues, which we know cannot be solved by ourselves. We need to partner with people like yourselves, with organizations like Global Conservation Force and many others, to come up with solutions to today's issues, to give our children hope for the future, and to really inspire each other to be better for this planet and for the wildlife that we share. So happy World Wildlife Day, everyone. We look forward to seeing what comes out of today's session.
Amazing. And thank you so much, Dr. William Fowlds, for the video and for all of your dedication and all the work that you're doing to help protect our rhinos and wildlife. And today I'm grateful for our distinguished speakers to be here to share their insights. We want to highlight today some of the incredible collaborative work and partnerships that they've been involved in, hear their success stories of partnerships, and the ways that we can move forward, hear insights from our expert speakers and get inspired, and how we can move forward to expedite the protection of wildlife through strategic partnerships. We are very fortunate today to hear from Mr. Mike Veale, Ms. Dune Ives, Ms. Karen Wood, Ms. Alice Pasqualato, and Mr. Ralph Chami. Now, each of our speakers will be presenting their slides shortly, and we'll go ahead and start with Mr. Mike Veale, Mike, President of Global Conservation Force.
Hi, Azzy. Thank you so much for having us today. It's a great honor and pleasure to be joining everybody for the World Wildlife Day celebrations and educational panel. Today, I'm going to keep my introduction slides pretty short, but I think the key target of everything that we're going to be speaking about, obviously, is going to be partnerships and collaborations and how that truly builds success. For starters, let me share my screen. All right, can everybody see that okay? Perfect. Yeah. So I like to use this as one of the introductory photos because this is one of our core senior instructors teaching a fellow ranger how to track. Now, tracking leaves a trail for you to follow or for you to follow, whether that's wildlife or in this case, man tracking for poachers. but commonly we're not looking behind us when we initially start tracking. The reason we like to use tracking, sorry, my dog's there. The reason we like to use tracking as an example is it's an evidence-based trail. So you can see what's happening and what's going on around you. With this experience and skill set, it takes a lot of time to develop and a lot of trust between multiple team members. For this next slide, though, I think the real big take home is there is no one silver bullet in all of conservation that's going to solve these problems except for humans. We are the cause, so we have to be the solution. When we get to points with these big major conflicts, or we are in these very serious multidimensional, multifocal issues, commonly the solution comes forward as, what if we just do this? And that is the easy way out. And unfortunately, there is no easy way out in any of this at this point in time. So when we're looking through expanding our operations or expanding our programs and our projects, we need to look at targeted experience for the best case situation in those locations with those issues, bring together teams so that we can ultimately use the best use of resources, including our time and funding, so that we can create a stronger platform for not just the immediate impact, but the long-lasting, game-changing impacts that we all hope to actually achieve in the long run. That change that we want to see visible for generations to come. So that also comes into the operations, expanding opportunities by facilitating team growth. So if I have a weakness and someone has a strength, but we're working together, we are now stronger. We're going to go further and farther. So we need to work together to go farther. So there's a quote that I also like, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go, or sorry, if you'd like to go far, go together. And it's an interpretation of an African proverb that we hear regularly, especially in Southern Africa. And it really hits home for conservation. It's very easy to go fast. It's very easy to go by yourself, especially in conservation, but your lasting impacts are very short-lived. So you need to make sure that you build a true platform like you would be the foundation of a house, so that you can actually build on top of that for generations and multiple projects. So when we talk about conservation, and especially in the rhino and elephant realm or habitat security, fortress conservation is generally referred to as the method of which most Southern African countries fence in wildlife. However, when I like to use it in presentations, I like to change that use of term for how we can create fortresses for conservation by integrating multifocal aspects for conservation. So if we're looking at each one of these grids with a rhino and each one of these grids with an elephant, those are separate reserves. If you remove all of these lines and all these connections, those are island nations, essentially all self-dependent, self-reliant for funding. So the general habitat space is actually more vulnerable for issues that can attack, especially when organized crime is involved. But when we work together, we collaborate, we synchronize, and we organize, you can take multiple aspects of funding, multiple resources of expert use and time, technology, PR, integrate the community, advance education, advance law enforcement, and advance all aspects together so that whole entire region benefits. So you're changing the dynamic of island nation by actual reserve to regional conservation for large swaths of habitats that may be broken up into sections. So with our approach through Global Conservation Force, we tackle this in multiple areas through anti-poaching units, our conservation efforts, wildlife trafficking investigations, and international education awareness. So at the end of this quick introduction, I like to use this photo because in this single photo, there are over 10 different specialists and stakeholders in the photo and outside of it, coming together with joint resources to save the rhino, which ultimately saving the rhino is protecting an entire habitat, which is also now expanding. So Aziz, I'll pass it back to you. Thank you for allowing me the time to introduce myself in Global Conservation Force, and I look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you for your presentation.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
And I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Alice Pasqualato. Alice works as a policy officer at the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime, which she joined in early 2021. She holds a degree in law from the University of Padua, where she graduated from cum laude with a thesis on the EU Environmental Crime Directive. She's the co-author of a number of publications on the topic of wildlife trade in collaboration with legal atlas such as To and Through the Gulf, IWT Routes, and Legal Environment. Welcome, Alice.
Thank you so much, Hazi. I will quickly share my screen and then get started. There we go. Can everyone see it okay?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, thank you again for having me. It's such a pleasure to celebrate World Wildlife Day, although a little bit late, but we're just a few hours after it ended. And it's fantastic to be a part of this panel and talk a little bit about what the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime is doing to tackle a number of wildlife issues. The Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime is an international initiative hosted by ADM Capital Foundation and chaired by John Scallon, former Secretary General of CITES. It was created in 2020, actually right during the pandemic, with two objectives. One being the promotion of a global agreement against wildlife trafficking, taking the form of an additional protocol to the UNTOC. And the other one, which unfortunately we won't be able to talk about today due to time restraints, promoting a One Health approach to wildlife trade and markets. Now, again, as Mike was saying, there's no one silver bullet to fix this issue. And so when I talk about our objective of promoting a global agreement against wildlife trafficking, that's only one way. The reason why we're focusing on wildlife trafficking is that, as I'm sure many of you know, it's one of the world's top criminal activities, ranked alongside drugs trafficking, arms trafficking, human trafficking, and value is estimated between 7 and 23 billion USD a year. Now, I think, as Ralph will say later on, there's also a number of impacts that come from wildlife trafficking that are not necessarily about wildlife conservation. There are climate consequences, there are security consequences, and one report that we like to mention quite often is that when you include the economic impact of the lost ecosystem services such as carbon storage, biodiversity conservation, water filtration, the World Bank has estimated wildlife trafficking together with illegal logging and fishing at about $1 to $2 trillion a year. So it's considered to be one of the largest illegal markets in the world, but unfortunately, we still don't have a global agreement to tackle it. Now, because today we're talking about strategic partnerships, I would just like to mention that we are supported by a number of NGOs, corporations, and industry associations, and these are just some of them. We have close to 30 now. The reason why I am so passionate about what we're doing is that the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime has really been at the forefront of promoting a global agreement against wildlife trafficking. We are doing this through promoting a fourth protocol to the UNTOC, and 3 protocols actually already exist. One dealing with human trafficking, one firearms trafficking and manufacturing, and the other one migrant smuggling. A fourth protocol on wildlife trafficking would have numerous benefits. I'm just going to mention some of them. I think, as many of you probably know, there is unfortunately, from a legal perspective, no universally accepted definition of the term wildlife trafficking, and a global agreement would allow us to have a convergence of national approaches and avoid the issues that we're currently having now, where different jurisdictions employ different terminologies. Again, this is just one of the many benefits that could come out of the protocol. Our work so far has, and again, I want to really thank all of our international champions and partners for leading to these initial results, has led to 4 presidential statements from the presidents of 4 countries, Gabon, Costa Rica, Angola, and Malawi, who have all called for a protocol to tackle illicit wildlife trafficking through a global agreement. I'm happy to also say that a few months ago, in May 2022, or at least it sounds like a few months ago, but at this point, it's almost been a year, actually. We were at the UN Crime Commission, where a number of countries sponsored, and I would thank particularly Angola, Kenya, and Peru for really leading this effort, a resolution that was adopted by the UN Crime Commission during its 31st session. With this resolution, the UN Crime Commission invited member states to share their views on possible responses to strengthen the international legal framework, including an additional protocol to the UNTOC. The resolution also requests the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, based here in Vienna, to compile a report on the information provided by member states and submit it for the consideration of the next UN Crime Commission, which is going to be in May 2023. Other recent expressions of support have come from the EU Commission in its revision of the EU Action Plan Against Wildlife Trafficking, and then more recently, just in February, a few weeks ago, an American Bar Association resolution that urged all UNTOC parties to adopt a wildlife crime protocol. Again, this is just a little bit of the work that we've been doing over the last 3 years, but if you're interested in learning more, you can visit our website and wildlifecrime.org, and I am very happy to discuss this at any point. This is my email. I'm happy to talk about this, and you can contact me or our team, and I would say we're obviously happy to build more of these strategic partnerships that we're celebrating today. Thank you again, Hazi.
Thank you so much, Alice. Thank you for sharing your slides and your work. It is absolutely essential, and we see how strategic partnerships, what we need, how much we need to come together and bring together organizations to tackle the wildlife crime and the wildlife trafficking. And that's an area I'm quite passionate about as well. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Dune Ives. Dune is the Chief Executive Officer for Movements That Matter and also founding Chief Executive Officer for Lonely Veale. Dune is a cultural and communication strategist, impact campaigner, and executive. Previously founding CEO for global changemaker Lonely Veale and co-founder of Paul G. Allen's Vulcan Philanthropy. Dune has recently launched Movement That Matter, a strategic advisory service firm that works with Fortune 500 companies, leading nonprofit organizations and philanthropies to develop and deliver sensible and impactful strategies for the new company in the face of an increasingly disruptive and unpredictable environment. Dune holds her PhD in psychology and is an NACD certified board director. Welcome, Dune.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm so humbled by the incredible panelists that I'm sharing today with. So well done on pulling together an incredible panel. I'm going to share just a few slides with you that I think help frame my perspective on partnerships, and also give you a sample of the work that I've been really fortunate to be a part of over the last, I guess, 11 years of my professional career. If you've heard me speak before, you have probably heard me say collaboration is a 4-letter word. I'll be the first to say collaborations and partnerships are not easy. They can be very challenging. And successful collaborations are so exciting, and successful partnerships are just so giving and so rewarding. But I wanted to start by setting the stage for why have partnerships and collaborations in the beginning, and then I'll end with a few thoughts on how to help ensure that they're successful, both from your perspective, if you are seeking to build a collaborative relationship, as well as from your collaborators' perspective. So first, the case for partnerships. You've heard a few of these ideas already, but number one is to share knowledge. You know, if any one of us had the solution to our environmental crisis that we currently are facing, none of us would be on this panel. We would have already solved it. So we don't. what we have is we have a semblance of ideas of what is going to work really well. And those ideas continue to be informed through the partnerships that we build with one another. The more we learn from each other, the more we share knowledge and resources, then the more that we're going to be able to achieve our ambitions. It also allows us to expand our audiences into new networks. I'm going to share with you some partnerships, both from the wildlife side when I worked at Vulcan, but also from the Lonely Well side, that show, boy, we partnered with a lot of very interesting, unique companies. And purposefully is because we wanted to get the message of plastic pollution out into the broader world so that more people were talking about it in a way that was easy for them to understand. Generate new ideas and inspiration. There's nothing better than coming together with a partner, which we saw in our Great Elephant Census, and you come in with one idea and you walk away with something completely different. It is so beneficial to build on each other's ideas. And then this last one, I can't express this enough, especially if you are intending to work with corporations, is to be able to leverage a supportive network to test ideas before you scale. Corporations are by their very nature conservative and unlikely to move forward with something unless they know that it's going to work. So building a safe, supportive environment where they can work with one another, I have found is just really critical to being successful. So just a couple of examples, and I can share with you some of the outcomes from these examples. This was actually my very first project at the Paul G. Allen Family Foundation and Vulcan Philanthropy, the Great Elephant Census. I have to be honest with you, I had no idea how difficult it was going to be to get 7 NGOs and 90 scientists to agree on a protocol. That was a fascinating exercise in patience and trust and resilience in conversation. But what ended up happening is we launched the Great Elephant Census in 2013. It culminated in 2016 with a pretty dire report showing that 30% of the African savanna elephant population had declined in 7 years. But some really incredible things came out of it, including in Washington State, we launched Initiative 1401, which sought to close a loophole in wildlife trafficking. It was the most successful statewide campaign that had ever been run before, and it laid the groundwork for expanding beyond elephants and rhinos to 10 species and provide a model legislation that could be replicated on our West Coast and in Hawaii. It also served as the background and the basis for a technology product that continues to live on at the Allen Institute called Earth Ranger, which aggregates data from multiple sources in order to provide a predictive tool, analytical tool for the guys and gals that are on the ground doing the hard work every day to protect these beautiful creatures. Yet, I'll say again, 90 NGOs and 7 NGOs and 90 scientists. 90 NGOs might have actually brought me to my knees, but it was very successful. But patience is really key in clarity and communication. The second project I was really fortunate to help develop and launch was Global FinPrint. Now, Global FinPrint arose from a question that I asked a colleague at Pew Charitable Trust when I kept hearing at the Economist World Ocean Summit, 100 million sharks are taken from the ocean every year. And I kept asking, but how many are left? And where are they? So that we could start to apply our conservation dollars in those areas to protect those ecosystems and then rebuild other ecosystems that had been degraded. So fast forward, the team surveyed 371 reefs across 4 geographic areas. This took 6 institutions and countless collaborators. And one of the most important findings, which I think is really critical then to be able to direct conservation dollars, is that 20% of the surveyed reefs showed no sharks were detected. So this is another example in the wildlife sector of, some very incredibly talented, passionate scientists and institutions coming together and identifying a common approach they would take in doing this survey of nearshore reef environments for sharks and rays, and putting forward some data that allows the conservation world then to be able to identify how to direct, unfortunately, still limited conservation dollars. Now, I left Vulcan and went to this tiny startup called Lonely Whale and was fully immersed in this world of how do we create marketing campaigns that allow us to raise awareness around single-use plastics in a way that engages the hearts and minds of people and get them to do something, not just one time, but multiple times, and have an impact. So the first campaign that we launched is called Strawless Ocean. This campaign had a reach of over 6 billion across more than 30 countries and ended up resulting in policy change in more than 100 cities, countries, and corporations globally. It really shifted the narrative. It shifted our behavioral norms, but it was never intended to just stop at this one campaign. Within the first 4 weeks of the campaign, we had over 150 collaborators helping to raise awareness. Now, for those who live in the NGO space, you know that there is extreme competition for airspace and resources. What this required of our team is to really leave our egos at the door and allow others to come in and make it their own. I think that was one of the key reasons why it was so successful. We then launched Question How You Hydrate. Now, this was a campaign focused on the increasing growth of the single-use plastic bottled water industry. In 2016, 27% of all new virgin PET polymers were created, this is from oil and gas, for the express reason to help to promote and support the growth of the single-use plastic bottled water market. So for us, we saw this as an opportunity to start to pull that profit center away from oil and gas, to switch out from a disposable product to something that was infinitely recyclable. In our case, it was both aluminum, but also reusables. And it required incredible collaboration across brands, across influencers, and across NGOs to make this happen. Immediately, we saw Pepsi and Coca-Cola switching from plastic bottles to aluminum cans for Aquafina and Dasani. Next wave is an interesting test case in collaboration across market leaders. So knowing that if we're going to solve the plastic pollution crisis, we need to start to value used plastic. So we're not creating new virgin resins. We need to start collecting this material. Yes, we need to reduce, but there's also a tremendous amount of new plastic going into the ocean every year. So let's reduce what we have by taking it back and using it in products like you see on my screen. We had competitors sitting at the table across from one another. Herman Miller and Human Scale and IKEA, all competitors for the same supply chain. And then HP and Dell, staunch competitors within the marketplace, sitting down, agreeing with one another, and testing out new ideas, new ways of working on this issue, so that we're not only stopping the flow of plastic into the ocean, but we're also protecting those communities that are on the front lines, collecting this material every day and ensuring that they have their social security and framework really thought through before we even get started in a community. And then lastly, I love this one as well. So we had been working for several years with a global group of young, we call them ocean heroes from, oh gosh, I think it's top, it was more than 90 countries. These youth between the ages of 9 to 19 have incredible stories to tell, but we felt like their stories weren't getting out there enough. So we partnered with HP and together created a digital publication called Awake Magazine, that is created by these youth leaders, 5 editors from around the world, and tell the story of what kids are doing and their perspectives and what matters to them in really compelling, engaging ways. We couldn't have done this without a brand like HP, who we felt were completely aligned with our goals on ocean plastic and on climate reduction. So we picked this partner very carefully, which is something also to keep in mind if you're going to collaborate with a brand. So I'll just wrap it up here with just a few thoughts, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Azzy, of how to ensure collaborations work. You know, first and foremost is be really clear about your intentions. Be honest, be upfront. I think err on the side of more communication at the beginning than less. Don't lead with assumptions. Lead with clearly articulated expectations. Also lead with curiosity and a growth mindset. The best collaborations and partnerships, in my experience, come from those where you believe it's possible to achieve what you're trying to achieve and then even go further. So pick the right partners who will do that with you, but be realistic about what's possible. And I think this last one is aligned with that. You know, a wise woman once said to me that you need to move at the speed of trust. Now that's going to be different for every organization and every cause, every issue. But what that means is don't move too fast for the sake of moving fast. Move at the speed that it takes to build trust and to retain that trust, which is a lifelong learning of mine and something that I'm continuing to work on developing my skill in that arena. I'm sure that the other panelists will have more to say about what works and how to ensure that it works, but I'll leave it here and turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Dune, for sharing all your insights and such incredible examples, so inspiring that these programs, these projects that you shared, collaborations, partnerships, even with competitors that you mentioned, and they've led to successful results from the elephants to battling the plastic pollution. Now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Karen Wood. Karen is the Senior Director for Global Policy at Panthera. She works within the Panthera program, an international conservation NGO focused on the recovery of wild cat populations around the world. Karen leads the development and communication of Panthera's science-based policy positions and its strategy for shaping global environmental policy through the lens of wild cats. Before returning to the nonprofit world in 2009, Karen spent 11 years as a vice president at CNET Networks, the pioneering technology media company. Karen began her career at the March of Dimes and has pursued mission-driven work consistently as an employee, volunteer, and board member. She's a graduate of Vassar College, and welcome, Karen. Pleasure to have you.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Good evening. And as you, thank you very much for organizing this wonderful panel on the occasion of World Wildlife Day and a discussion around a critical element of wildlife conservation, which is partnerships. And I will share my screen, or attempt to, and do a little short presentation. Can everybody see what I'm looking at? Yes?
Yes.
So, like everybody else today, I think the theme of the day is that wildlife conservation is actually not possible without partnerships. And that is especially true in cat conservation. So cats are natural conveners. They bring people together. And this is for a number of reasons. I mean, they are natural. They are symbols for nations. They are cultural icons. They're wide-ranging carnivores. They cover a lot of territory. They cross borders. And they're also indicators of biodiversity. And so there's a lot of stake for protecting wild cats because they help countries achieve a lot under the banner of wildcat conservation. And so currently there are several initiatives that are going on for wildcats. There are range-wide initiatives for tigers, snow leopards, and more recently African cats, and now jaguars, which is what I'm going to talk about today. These initiatives are creating unprecedented cooperation among governments, UN agencies, the multilateral environmental agreements, and international and local NGOs, never be seen before. And the benefits, many of which have been talked about already today, include knowledge sharing, technology sharing, and opportunities for sustainable financing, capacity building for implementation. In fact, cat conservation requires collaboration. There is no way to address the extremely complex challenges that face wild cats around the world today, some of which have already been discussed with respect to other wildlife, habitat loss and fragmentation, infrastructure development like road kills and strikes that happen, illegal trade and trafficking, poaching, and also human-wildlife conflict. All of these subject cats to enormous threats around the world wherever they are. And the only way to address them is through multi-stakeholder partnerships. So jaguars are perhaps one of the best conveners that we can think of in the wildcat world. And that's because they have an enormous range. They cover 18 countries from northern Mexico to northern Argentina along a connected pathway that we call the Jaguar Corridor. They are still remarkably a single species throughout their entire range. And so the stakes are really high to keep them as a single species. That's what creates their resilience. And this effort to connect them from northern Mexico to northern Argentina and create conservation corridors between core populations is the way we maintain the genetic flow and connectivity that preserves that resilience and allows them to survive and thrive into the future. And so that takes a massive amount of work among a lot of stakeholders. So in order to achieve that, in 2018, a group of stakeholders convened at the UN for a high-level summit to talk about the future of jaguar conservation. It brought together 14 range countries, international NGOs, scientists, UN agencies, some of which are listed here. And then a statement was developed among those groups called the New York Statement that committed to range-wide jaguar conservation and collaboration. Following that meeting, the Jaguar 2030 roadmap was developed, and this is a framework for cooperation among the 18 range countries to develop a range-wide plan for jaguar conservation. It has numerous objectives, broader engagement, commitment by various stakeholders, international government cooperation, and its objective is to secure 30 key jaguar landscapes by 2030. So how is this partnership doing today, and what have we accomplished in the last 5 years? It happens to actually be not only World Wildlife Day and the 50th anniversary of CITES, but 5 years since this partnership was formed in 2018. So most of the past 5 years has been devoted to building momentum. The partnership is supported by a Jaguar 2030 Coordination Committee, which includes UNDP, UNEP, the secretariats of CITES and CMS, the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, and Panthera, WWF, and WCS, all working together with range state governments. So we are building international cooperation. This has been facilitated in some ways by a number of range state meetings that were held over the last several years in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt at COP14, where the roadmap was first launched. Also last year in New York during the high-level political forum at the UN, with Costa Rica as the host. And then most recently in Panama at the COP19 for CITES, where all 18 range states participated in a discussion around the future of jaguar conservation that would be informed under the new decisions on jaguars that were adopted just days later. We are working on building awareness about the plight of jaguars and what is needed to protect them. And this has been through a number of initiatives. We developed something called International Jaguar Day, which is just a platform every year on November 29th for jaguar range countries and others to talk about their local activities, to do education, and to keep the jaguar front and center. We also introduced something called the Jaguar Parade, which was a public art exhibition that came to New York City in October. Beautifully decorated jaguar statues were placed in high traffic areas throughout the city as a way to raise awareness, and also were auctioned. They were sponsored and then auctioned to raise funds for local activities on the ground. The committee is also helping range states build capacity. So this is, as many of you may know, we are currently in the new cycle for the funding from GEF, the Global Environment Facility, and GEF 8, helping range countries learn how to access those funds with some information sessions. One of them that we had in December attracted almost 200 people to learn about the process for GEF and the timeline, which is very important to know. We have been working with the GEF Secretariat to help range countries understand what their options are and their opportunities are, how to access that funding. And in the current cycle of GEF, there are two or several new integrated programs that provide additional incentives for countries under those programs, some of which are directly relevant to jaguar conservation, the Wildlife Conservation for Development Integrated Program, the Mesoamerican Critical Forest Biome Program. And so the committee was able to both coordinate internally on a strategy to help bring jaguars into the Jeff 8 process in a coordinated way for regional effect, and also working directly with range countries to help them prepare their expressions of interest where there were jaguars as an element. And at last count, we believe there were at least 10 that were submitted, and the process will go forward, hopefully unlocking multi-millions of dollars for jaguar projects over the next 4 years or related projects. We've been evolving the Jaguar 2030 roadmap in a dynamic environment. This includes updating maps based on new assessments of what's happening in jaguar range and which priority landscapes should be the focus for the next 7 years in the road to 2030. Also understanding, based on a study from CITES and several others that have been introduced in the last few years, having to do with the illegal trade in jaguars, how to address an emerging trade that's happening both domestically and internationally before it becomes an issue that ends up with end wildlife crime. And so we are building that into the roadmap and helping countries think about what they need to do to get on top of that problem before it blossoms. And also supporting policy at the global level. So as I mentioned, under CITES at the last COP, there was a new set of decisions on jaguars that was adopted, that all jaguar range states are parties to CITES and are now mandated to address these decisions and implement them. They have to do with monitoring, range-wide monitoring, capacity building around illegal trade in jaguars, and also international cooperation on jaguar conservation. And so where do we go from here? We're really poised to help range countries implement. And as the next step in that will be a range state meeting, which will be held later this year. It will be hosted by Brazil under their new administration, but it's actually been building for a couple of years. They first expressed interest in hosting the range state meeting at the last CITES Standing Committee meeting in Lyon last year. And we're now working with the new administration to, with CITES and CMS and the Jaguar 2030 Coordination Committee to plan for that meeting, which will take place in Brazil later this year. And so this is just one of many types of partnerships for wildcats that Panthera is engaged in. They run the gamut, but this one is particularly poignant and relevant because of all of the stakeholders involved and because of the potential. I think it was Dune who said, for the potential for success, we believe that it's not too late for jaguars. They're a resilient species. They are relatively abundant compared to tigers, for example, and they're the habitat is there. The ability to protect jaguars throughout the range exists if we do it in a way that is sustainable and does not wall jaguars off. I think it was Mike who was talking about fortress conservation, but actually looks to provide a connected pathway that connects them with people and runs through human-dominated environments. If we do that in the right way, then we can create a sustainable future for jaguars. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you for the inspiring presentation and all the work that you're doing on this project, helping to protect the jaguars. And now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Ralph Chami, Assistant Director at the International Monetary Fund. Ralph is a financial economist and Assistant Director at the IMF. He's the co-founder of Blue Green Future and Rebellions Earth. Ralph has developed a novel way to tackle both climate change and biodiversity loss, namely to reposition species such as whales and elephants as crucial allies in the quest to sequester carbon, secure climate resilient ecosystems, and generate income for local communities. Welcome, Ralph. Pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Azi. It's wonderful to be part of this panel and to celebrate together the the intrinsic value, I should say, of wildlife. I'd like to share my screen with you, if hopefully works out. Let's see, is that the one I want? Okay, let's see. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, so I have to put it in a presentation form. Okay. All right. So what I would like to focus on mainly is the value of wildlife, just the value that comes actually from their own intrinsic value, and going beyond that, what is the value to our health and to our economic well-being. And in order to put things in context, especially in light of the 11th hour concern about the climate change, I thought when we think of climate change, we always think of fighting climate change. Well, we always think of, well, trees can help sequester carbon. But science tells us actually fauna, be it on land or in the water, are actually play a key role in the carbon sequestration. So just focusing on one such ecosystem service, this is work of Fabio Berzaghi and colleagues. This is Nature Journal 2019, where Fabio and his colleagues showed that the elephants, through the way they walk in the forest and the way they proclivity for eating plants that are low in fiber, high in protein, and low in carbon, leaving plants that are high in fiber and high in carbon alone. He basically followed it a couple of weeks ago with a new article in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, where he shows that not only elephants, but also megafauna play a key role in the carbon sequestration in the forests. That would include the hippos, that would include the zebras, that would include the gorillas and others. In the case of the elephants, they calculate that they increase the carbon sequestration in the forest by at least 7 to 14%, depending on their concentration in the forest. If you were to go into the water, we also know that we all know about seagrass, salt marshes, and so forth, but people didn't know that also fauna in the water also helps to sequester carbon. The great allies in the fight against climate change. This is work of Andy Pershing of 2010, and then papers that followed, showcasing that the great whales capture carbon on their body, and when they die, they sink to the bottom of the ocean. And also, just like their cousins on land, they fertilize the phytoplankton, and phytoplankton are the lungs of the planet in terms of their carbon sequestration. And so the whales, just like the elephants, fertilize the phyto, and therefore one whale is equivalent to thousands of trees in terms of their carbon sequestration. And this is just one service out of many that they perform just by leading their life naturally. So as the elephant frolics freely in the forest, as nature deemed it to, and as the whale frolics freely in the water as nature wanted it to, they help to fight climate change. Now, you would think with all of this, money should be pouring in to help protect wildlife and nature. And what we find out is that, unfortunately, not so. So basically, people have calculated that the needed amount the gap that is missing, once you bring in money from philanthropy and altruism and proselytizing to people till you're blue in the face, you realize that there's still billions of dollars in money that is still needed in order to protect nature itself. Question is, where is it going to come from? We can't tell people to give more because we keep telling them to give more, and they've said this is how much we want to give. So what else can we do? Well, it turns out that there is now a market for the carbon sequestration services of nature. So there's a carbon market. And the ton of carbon right now trading on the European exchange is 100 euros per ton. So now we can go back to the elephant, and if we could speak her language, we would ask her the following question: what would you like to see? And she would tell us, why don't you pay me for my service? Hey, Ralph, you work for the IMF, and the IMF pays you a salary. I'm working for all of humanity, sequestering carbon in the forest. Why don't you pay me a salary? So what we did, we sat down and figured out, well, how much would we have to pay the elephant if we could understand her language, because she does speak a language, a very sophisticated language. She would tell us, hey guys, here my lifetime earnings from just grabbing carbon to keep you guys alive is about $1.75 million. When we did this work, the price of carbon was $24 a ton. The price of carbon today is $100 a ton. So you can multiply that number by at least 4 times. If we could speak the language of the whales, the whale would say the same. Hey, dude, why don't you pay me for my services? I'm capturing carbon on behalf of you. And all you guys manage to do is sing me songs and write poems about me and have a while you're killing me with impunity. Why don't you pay me a salary for my services? And so the question is, well, how much is all of this worth? Well, it turns out that if we were to calculate the present value of the lifetime earnings of a whale would be at least $2 million. And if you like to think of it in terms of a salary, you'd have to pay her at least $60,000 a year for just her grabbing carbon on behalf of all of humanity. So the question is, what do you do with this? So the science is telling us that fauna, wildlife on land and in the water is, plays a key role in keeping us alive. Can we use those valuations to protect and restore nature and wildlife and provide for nature stewards, after all, the people that live around the wildlife, and help fight climate change at the same time? Can we do so? And the answer is yes, of course we can. Here's an example of how we can do it. There are all these buyers on the left-hand side are all these companies and individuals and countries that made commitments to go carbon zero, carbon negative, carbon neutral. And what they can do, they can pay those animals, those wildlife, our fellow creatures, for their services. And the money, we can measure their services. We have the sensors, we have the technology to figure out exactly how much carbon an elephant is producing, or a whale, or whatever it is. And the money can go to look after the elephants in perpetuity and look after the communities that live with the elephants in perpetuity. Now, keep in mind here, we are not selling the elephants or the whales or anything. We're just paying them, recognizing the value of their services, rather than just singing and chanting about them and singing Kumbaya and all that stuff, which is also nice. All right, so if we were to do so, look how wonderful it is. Those that are sitting on all of this natural capital, which includes fauna and flora, blue and green, would find, if it's the government that say, well, those elephants are in my country, well, the government would benefit, because all that revenue from the sale of the carbon or the biodiversity credits, if you like, all that money will come in and help those countries, especially in the global south, pay back their debts and actually do well. The buyers of the carbon credits, or the resilience credits, if you like, say it's Microsoft that decides to purchase the carbon credits of these elephants, would get to look really good, because they're saying we're reducing our carbon footprint. We are also improving our ESG score. And since we are looking after the elephants, and by looking after the elephants, we're looking after the forest, and by looking after the forest and the elephants, we're also looking after local communities. They get to say that we are meeting our Sustainable Development Goals 1, 3, 4, 8, 10, 13, 14, 15. Who else benefits? Nature itself benefits, because you are building resilience in nature. You are bringing the money back that we extracted from nature by killing the elephants and killing those and the whales and killing nature itself. We're recognizing we made a mistake, and we're bringing the money back into nature to look after nature in perpetuity. And guess what? When you create resilience in nature, you create resilience in the people. Because people, local communities, and indigenous people, all of us, we are the stewards of nature. And so when we create resilience in nature, we create resilience in the communities, we can create employment, we can alleviate poverty and stabilize people on their land. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Very inspiring and so powerful. And now I have some questions for our panelists. We're going to start into our panel discussion. We're going to be exploring ways that we can help expedite the protection of wildlife through strategic partnerships. And I do have an opening question for any of our panelists that would like to highlight a story or a story perhaps that you haven't highlighted, a successful story of partnership that you have had that has led to substantial progress. And Mike, I'd like to start with you on this question.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I would say probably one of the more recent big landmark moments is we have been working for over a decade on facilitating growth for multiple regional partners in Southern Africa. And over that time, the teams have developed to a stage that we can comfortably advance things like technology, infrastructure, staffing, training, and all things considered with operating a healthy reserve environment for biodiverse, rich environments. At this point, we are now moving forward. We're a year and a half into a corridor building phase. And that took dozens of partnerships, dozens of reserves, dozens of communities, and we're actually seeing progress now. So we've dropped fence lines, the advancement of Earth Ranger, which I heard brought up, which has been phenomenal for us. It has been the technology we've all been waiting for to come online, communicating with new tracking collars that only this year have adapted to AI with solar. So now teams that are on the ground can be more successful with their use of time and resources, but now we are on a phase where we're actually feeling like we're making progress versus kind of crawling uphill. So to date now, there's a vision of a corridor that we call the Bushman's River Corridor between Amakhala and Kariga Game Reserve. The first phases were to develop the teams regionally on each reserve, set up the infrastructure for the tech, get that tech applied to the species and the reserves, and then start dropping fence lines. So we have dropped some fence lines in Kariga, some land has been purchased, and now we have a actual visual map guide to what segments of land secure the most success for wildlife and people as we work on the most complicated step, which is expanding habitat that starts to encroach into developed areas. So how do we rewild farmland that's been used heavily for 100 to 200 years plus and rewild that, get the species back into play with their biomechanic aspects. So giraffe, elephant, smaller game species, and your key predator species. And so we are actually at a phase after a full decade of lots of different people, lots of different organizations putting a lot of effort into multiple different programs. We regionally are seeing that payback now. So the return of wildlife, the return of biodiversity, the securement of land for biodiversity, and one of the big roles that we play as GCF is establishing and expanding the community integration into the vocational aspects of all things conservation. So expanding job opportunities and job training for those communities immediately outside of those reserves, so they can be the representatives and start to become a bigger green barrier to the external sides of all things civilization that are pressing the wildlife into these smaller zones.
Azzy, could I follow along what Mike said? So on Earth Ranger, Mike, that was both. So I think this is an important kind of collaboration case study. So to get Earth Ranger to where it was, even of its infancy, required collaboration across 7 or 8 internal departments at Vulcan, if you can imagine.
Oh, I can believe it. It's a great program.
It's a great program. But when Ted brought that back from his trip in Africa, he brought that back, this concept of, gosh, what if we could pull together these data sets and give tools to people? Like, what would that look and feel like? And I think that just that even that opening question is so important, and it didn't get shut down. I think that's a key thing in collaborations, right? Is that you have to really understand the value of expanding the conversation and hearing all perspectives and not leading with no, but leading with, yeah, what if? How can we do that? How can we make that possible? And so tremendous input both internally and externally, was required to get it, just even to get approval to launch it as a pilot, let alone expand it to what it's become. But that really was because of Ted Schmidt at Vulcan, in his orientation around how do we embrace, how do we engage, how do we open up a dialogue? So we're not leading with what we think is right? But we're leading with a question, and we really want to hear and truly hear people. And I think, Ozzy, that can't be understated, the importance of really listening and being open to a conversation in order for collaboration to really be successful. So I just wanted to piggyback a little bit on what Mike said, and just that key thing. It could have died on the vine very quickly.
Yeah,
very quickly, but it didn't, and it lasted where other initiatives didn't.
And on top of that, I think what's really important in the discussion of especially technology, the field of conservation, it doesn't have a giant R&D budget for things that they can guess on. And so when a company of experts is coming to conservationists in a challenge that everybody's facing, and they're saying, we'll take this weight off your back, how do we help you? And then each locally set team is specifically able to custom cater and design it to their needs. This program is groundbreaking, because even I just recently got back, we were helping multiple reserves with the current uptick in pressures with rhino poaching, and with very minimal resources, many teams recovering from COVID, we're still able to be surgically accurate with the use of our time and resources with those key species that we're trying to protect from these syndicates. And I cannot say how much that program has helped. It is just absolutely game-changing.
Azzy, I think you may be muted.
Yes, thank you so much, Mike. And thank you, Dune, for sharing your insights. And now, Alice, do you have an example that you would like to share as far as a successful story of partnerships specific in regards to wildlife crime that has led to success?
Thank you, Azzy. I think for us, it's a bit hard to talk about successful results yet, because the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime is such a young project. And the fact that we focus on international legal reforms makes that even harder, because, as you know, it's a process that takes a long time. It's painfully slow. And so I don't necessarily want to talk about our result, but definitely successful work in progress, in a sense that the Global Initiative to End Wildlife Crime is an alliance, right? It's an alliance of environmental policy, legal, business, public health organizations, and experts. We also have individual experts that are working on this with us. And they come from all regions of the world. And this alliance has really made it possible for for the momentum to be built, and have 4 presidents of 4 countries, Angola, Gabon, Costa Rica, and Malawi, to come out and support a global agreement against wildlife trafficking. Even more, I would say the fact that in May 2022, we had this resolution at the UN Crime Commission calling for the to invite member states to submit their views on a potential global agreement. That resolution was then co-sponsored by 13 more member states. So we're seeing the momentum grow. We're seeing member states being more interested in having this conversation. And whether this conversation leads to an actual global agreement or other ways to strengthen the international legal framework, I think we can definitely talk about a successful work in progress. And we're all very proud of that.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Alice. Thank you. And Karen, I'd like to ask you, what do you envision to be an effective partnership in order to implement actions, and expedite the protection of the jaguar, specifically when it comes to protecting them from the threats such as the poaching and the hunting?
Yeah, I was actually going to give a great example of success, but I will go to the jaguars. If I was going to talk about lions, but if you want me to talk about jaguars, I can talk about that too.
And the success story as well. Welcome with the lions.
Okay, well, I'll start with that, because we just actually announced it yesterday that there's been some, with cats, one of the way we measure progress is when there are more cats. When populations are stable or increasing and we can see more cats on the ground, that's the end of our logic chain. And it takes a while, and it takes a lot of conditions, and it takes a lot of people to make it happen. And everybody on this call knows that. But we had an exciting development recently in Niokolo-Kobo National Park in Senegal, where the critically endangered West African lion was reduced down to fewer than 15 individuals as of 2011 when we started working there. And yesterday with an exciting partnership that we've had in place for a while with the Department of National Parks in Niokolo-Kobo, with the DNP, we announced that Florence, a critically endangered West African lion, was photographed, an exciting video of her with a new litter of cubs. We think it's her third litter. And by our count, she's contributed 1/3 of the park's lions, which have now increased to about 30. And this is a result of increased monitoring, increased patrolling, training and upskilling of the park's rangers, and keeping a very close eye on what's happening in the park, in the core areas. And this could only be done with an extremely tight partnership with the government. We're there at the behest of the government and the Department of National Parks, and working to increase the skills and capabilities and capacity of rangers who protect that very small number of lions. And we're also seeing biodiversity increase in the park with the increase in lions, so roan antelope and other species. So it's a very exciting confirmation of the work when you see that it's working. You have more cats, and more cats means more biodiversity. So that's my little story on lions for World Wildlife Day. And we can figure out how to post the video of that somewhere so you can see the really cute video of the cubs. But with respect to jaguars and poaching, yeah, I mean, this is a problem that has been suspected over time but not confirmed. In 2019, I think, CITES initiated a study on the illegal trade in jaguars, which had many, many participants, dozens of stakeholders who contributed to the study, and also subsequently a number of other scientific studies were published that showed that this was not just an emerging trade, but an existing trade that's happening domestically and also internationally. And one of the ways that CITES intends to help governments address this before it becomes a runaway problem is by increasing monitoring range-wide, and also data sharing, capacity for data sharing among governments. So these are all captured in the new decisions on jaguars. Again, I don't have a link and I won't go through all of them, but that were adopted under CITES. So it acknowledges under the convention, and all the, as I mentioned in my talk earlier, all the 18 range states are members of CITES, parties to the convention. So they are now mandated to observe these decisions and implement them, is meant to try and get a very clear picture of what's happening with trade, who the participants are, and what countries must do and need to do to keep an eye out for it, to share information, to understand what's happening in their own countries, and to be on the lookout so that it can be stopped and managed and regulated in its tracks. And so that is one of the key things that's happening now on jaguars, and it's just getting underway. But the understanding of what's happening in the trade is also developing. And as I mentioned, we are evolving the 2030 roadmap, so that which is really a playbook, a roadmap for countries to look at for how they can implement successful jaguar conservation nationally and range-wide. And the roadmap will provide tools and techniques and best practices for countries to observe in addressing illegal trade in jaguars.
Thank you so much for sharing, Karen. Ralph, I have a question for you now. How can we use strategic partnerships to help people that don't understand they don't hear the nature, or they may not understand the value of nature to hear nature. For example, how can we help people understand the value of a living whale is at least $3 million? How can strategic partnership help? What types of partnerships do you suggest?
Well, the partnerships that we're already involved in, I mean, to do this work, this is science-based finance. So you're already breaking down the silos. Finance never was involved in nature, in a living nature. Finance was involved in extractive nature. This is what's groundbreaking in this work, is for us to do this work, for me to do this work, we had to sit down with the scientists, for example, in the elephant's case, and understand the physiology of the elephants, because how else are you going to figure out how much carbon are they going to be able to produce by living and thriving on their own as nature deemed them to? So the first collaboration, every paper, in fact, our paper in the Pursuing National Academy of Sciences, you'll see there are scientists there. When we published with John Scanlon in Nature Journal, we had a legal mind, we had a scientist, we had conservationists from Africa with us on the paper. So you already see you're breaking down silos, and what it's doing, it's creating this cross-disciplinary work, which is really what is needed if we are to really help nature, protect nature. We cannot live in these silos, say, I do this, you do that, we don't talk to each other, or I win, you lose. No, we need to work with each other. So in everything that we do, we start with the science, then the evaluation. So which means we need to sit down with the scientists, how we did with the whales, so we did with the elephants. That's what we're doing with also seagrass, salt marsh mangroves. We sit down with the science, we understand the physiology of the asset. Based on that, we are able to place the valuation. So it's science-based. Then we need to consult the legal minds, such as John and others, saying, hey, who can speak on behalf of the elephants? Who has the right to speak on behalf of the whales? Where do we go from here? Once you have that, then you need the technology people. Notice how many people you're bringing to the table. The technology people, because we need the sensors, we need the satellites, we need all of that verification technology, right, to take it to the markets and to take the services. And then you're bringing the investors on board. And if you want to see some aspects of how this works, look at the Blue Boat Initiative, which is the Chilean government's with the NGO Cortes Solare Fundación, and see what the beautiful work they're doing in the Gulf of Corcovado. You can see the video on YouTube, how they're installing buoys in the water that allows them to not only tell you there's a whale in the water, but can tell you what species of whale is in the water, what depth, and they send that message to the ship saying, in your way, there's a humpback or a sei whale or a blue whale, in order for the ship basically to avoid. So already we're seeing successes in the sense that people come up to me all the time now and they say, how do I invest in an elephant? How do I invest in a whale? And I say, you're investing in the protection of the elephant. You're investing in the protection of the whale. And therefore you're protecting the waters and protecting the whole, it's a systems approach. So in a sense, what our work did, it brought inside the tent a group that was never involved in conservation, which is the financial sector, the private sector. Conservation was really a private conversation among activists, scientists, and policymakers. We were on the dark side. No one wanted to talk to us. No one wanted to engage with us. But Titanic is sinking, and we need everybody on board. We need all hands on deck. We can't leave anybody outside and say you can't. We all live under one sky. We only have one home, which is nature. Nature is our only home. So with that conviction in mind, this work really brings everybody together to solve the problem. The financial sector can bring tremendous amount of resources and can move very quickly. But we have to be careful, because they have to be reminded that all of this resources, all of that knowledge has to come to look after nature in perpetuity, and its stewards, local communities, local communities and indigenous communities, and the people that are interacting with nature. Once you do that, breaking down the silos, as June said before, this sense of siloed behavior, arrogant behavior. It's my turf, your turf. Once you get over that, I think we have a lot in common, and we can move very quickly.
Fascinating. Thank you very much, Veale. Big game changer, as you mentioned, bringing together the financial world into the conservation world and working together along with the scientists as well. We're all in it together, and it's all about this multidisciplinary collaboration to bring that success. Thank you, Veale.
Thank you.
And Dune, I have one question for you. We've talked about plastic pollution, polyester within our clothing, within the fashion industry. Lots of material scientists, new materials are being developed. How can we use strategic partnership to speed up the development and also the production of these innovative materials that can replace, for example, just single-use plastic?
Right, such a great question. One of the collaborations that I did not highlight in my presentation is the Tom Ford Plastic Innovation Prize. So after we finished our water bottle campaign at Lonely Whale, we looked out to see, well, what is the next single-use plastic that no one's really talking about that causes very significant harm to wildlife, both on land and in the marine environment? And how can we try to tackle that? And what we discovered was an insane amount of single-use polybags being used in the fashion sector every single year. So we've heard about water, we've heard about chemicals, we've heard about emissions, we've heard about social welfare issues from the fashion sector. We never really talked about the 180 billion single-use plastic polybags used every single year by the fashion industry, and none of them are recyclable. Zero. Even if they are collected, we can't do anything with it at a large scale. So for us, that was really intriguing. I love big, hairy issues like that. The bigger, the better. I probably should have been a big cat person, Karen, because the bigger, the better for me. And that was a big issue, and it was really exciting. So we spent about 2 years researching this issue. Where does the material come from? What are the polymers? Who produces them? Who out there is really focusing on this issue? And while we knew that there was an opportunity to start to put forward new materials that could solve for this issue at scale, we couldn't do it by ourselves. We needed somebody in the fashion industry to stand up with us. And we were really fortunate to have the iconic American fashion designer, Tom Ford, who is a lovely human and really cares deeply for the planet, for so many reasons, to stand next to us and to pull not only the fashion industry into the conversation, but importantly, pull in people from all over the world who have incredible solutions that they've been developing that haven't been able to get the attention that they deserve, the testing that they deserve, the scientific feedback that it deserves, the testing with corporations to see if the material works, and ultimately the investment to help it scale up. So because we had a name in Tom Ford, we were able to pull in applications from 5 continents, which was incredible. Iceland, Kenya, I believe, was in the finalist, Canada, the US, and then India. We also have a finalist from India that went through a year of testing. And now, I believe it's next Thursday, Tom Ford is going to be announcing the winners of the Plastic Innovation Prize. Now, it's going to take time for them to scale, to really scale up and to meet the ambitions of the fashion industry and for the rest of us. But I truly believe that the materiality that comes from this is going to be able to have a spillover effect in other parts of our life where we see thin film, single-use polybags. So I'm really excited about this, but quite honestly, we couldn't have done it without Tom and his star power within and outside of the fashion industry. And so that's an example of, even in plastics, we need partnerships to really be able to envision the possible, to think about things really differently. and to be able to galvanize support across an entire supply chain to make a difference. So I personally am like, I don't know who the finalists are. I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear next Thursday. Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. Hopefully lots of camels will be happy because they won't have plastic in their bellies that can't be digested anymore. So anyways, it's really exciting, but that would be, I think, a good example of a partnership on plastics.
Thank you so much for sharing, Dune. Yes, that's an excellent example, and I'm looking forward to see the results of it. It could be a big game changer.
Huge game changer. Huge. Yeah.
What we
with
need.
lots of co-benefits.
And I have one last question for our panelists. What is if there was one thing that you would recommend highly for the audience that are listening, what do you think would be the most important step for them that they can take now toward forming effective strategic partnerships? Action. What can they move? How can they move towards taking action quickly?
I'm happy to start with this one. I think one of the most important steps that you can take today is take a look at the work that you are doing. And if you are working alone or working with what I would call usual suspects, the organizations, companies, individuals you tend to work with, I want you to ask yourself one question. If you could learn something new that could help you advance progress on the work that you're doing, what is it that you can learn, and who do you think you can learn it from? It's the first step to kind of opening your heart and your mind to being able to develop a partnership that could be successful.
Excellent. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dune. And Alice.
For sure. I think Mike had his hand up. I don't want to steal his spotlight if he wants to go first.
Oh, you're fine. Please go ahead. No worries.
Okay. Well, I think my comment is maybe a little bit unusual, but I would say one thing that I'm a big advocate for is really getting youth involved, and not in a formal way. I was very happy to hear that Dune has been working with lots of young people on several projects. And I think, generally speaking, we do see a lot of youth involvement, even at a higher level within several UN agencies. I do think, though, that a lot of entities tend to treat that as more of a formal way of showcasing collaboration with new generations, whereas I think the real power of listening to young voices is that they haven't been doing what everyone else has been doing for decades. And me being 27, I really appreciate the fact that, you know, there are people that are willing to listen to me. And Ralph mentioned John Scallon, our chair. I think he's a great example of giving younger people the opportunity to really showcase their ideas and say what it is that they want to say. And so I would say I really encourage everyone to include younger professionals. And by that, I don't mean necessarily 16-year-old climate activists. I think we see a lot of that, and that's fantastic. But there's a whole new generation of young professionals that have those fresh ideas, and they mostly work at a volunteer level, and they don't have a way of being listened to, especially in the conservation space. And so I would say, because I am lucky enough to have had someone that listened to me, I would encourage everyone to do the same and really give young people that opportunity. Because again, we have been doing things a certain way for a long time, and there are people out there that don't know what that way is yet. And so they can bring that new energy. I feel very strongly about that.
Excellent point, Alice. Yes. Bringing the new eyes, bringing that new energy into the, in order to create action and big changes. Thank you, Alice.
Absolutely.
Yes. Mike.
Yeah, so I have to echo both of those ideas and comments for how to get involved are really important, because I think what we all are in agreement is we need more minds, we need more ideas, we need that creativity, and we do need to be able to advance what we all are trying to get towards. I'd say for me, though, the two things that I usually like to start with in this phase for people who are trying to identify a strategic partnership is really look at your team and yourself, and this kind of echoes what Dune was saying. Identify your strengths, identify your weaknesses, and be honest with those. And then sit down with maybe that close group within your team, workshop that, and then create baby steps. So what is your actual goal? Focus on that goal and create some kind of roadmap to that goal. And then branching out into your stars in the sky version of what you'd like to access and what's right in front of you. And don't forget what's right in front of you, because a lot of times you have a lot of resources right in front of your face that you may not be utilizing. And some of that actually are kids, the kids and the youth, and how they can be inspirational, or they can be the leaders of the next charge. So that's what I would say, is baby steps in looking at your strengths and weaknesses and finding that path.
Thank you very much, Mike. Yes, very insightful. And Karen.
Yeah, I echo what everybody else says. And I think about, too, that when engaging in a strategic partnership, to ensure that all of the stakeholders have a common endpoint in mind, which is to create something that endures on the ground. And so political winds change, administrations change, dynamics change, but partnerships that create ownership for the perseverance of living wildlife and benefits the communities that are living with them are the ones that will actually make a difference. And so I think if everybody can agree upon that at the outset, and then figure out what the steps they are going to need to take, what the enabling technologies and conditions are, who the other stakeholders and skill sets that they need to help with that, at the end of the day, it really matters that the people who are living with wildlife feel ownership and responsibility and understand what the benefits are of living with living wildlife. And I think if we can focus on the outcome, then that will make for stronger partnerships that endure.
I would like to first thank our speakers, our expert speakers, and our panelists for being here today, for sharing your insights and the incredible work that you are doing and you have been doing, and the examples of success stories that you have shared, impactful partnerships, helping our wildlife. Mike, Alice, Dune, Karen, and Ralph, thank you so much for being here today. And it was a pleasure having you. Yes, of course.
Thank you, Azzy. Thank you for having us. It was a great conversation, and I look forward to staying in touch with all of you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm hoping to partner with all of you now that we've met. And thank you, Azzy, for having us.
We've built some strategic partnerships.
Yes,
there you go.
And thank you everyone for watching the webinar, and I hope that this panel discussion has inspired you to take steps to come up with innovative partnerships and take actions towards saving our wildlife from extinction. And I look forward to seeing your new ideas and partnerships bloom in action.